Welcome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Katie O'Hara-Krebs, and I am the social media editor for Portal Libraries in the Academy. And today I'm pleased to welcome Brian Mathews, Associate Dean of Carnegie Mellon University Libraries, and soon to be Dean of Elon University Library, to speak with us about his feature article entitled A Cambrian Moment for Libraries, Shaping Futures Through Evolution and Leadership. This article can be found in Portal's preprint site in Volume 25, Issue 2. The article is free to read, and viewers may access the article by navigating to the Johns Hopkins Press preprint site for Portal. Welcome, Brian. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yes, I wondered if you could just start off by letting us know a little bit about what inspired you to explore and write about this topic.
So it's an interesting one. It really started 8, 9, maybe even 10 years ago. I can't remember exactly, but I was reading a children's book with my son about dinosaurs. And there's a whole chapter or section about Cambrian explosion, which I hadn't really studied before. It wasn't something was very familiar with, but it was like absolutely fascinating. And it's this period in time in Earth history where life suddenly diversified very radically. You went from simple single-bodied creatures to ones with shells and eyes and all this. And so there were all these different factors that combine to influence that. So changing in the environment, changes in oxygen, all this kind of pressure. And for whatever reason, that metaphor really like stuck with me. And over time, I began to sense or see these parallels in higher education, but obviously in libraries, as well. And thinking that are we living through some kind of moment like that now? The different pressures that we face, different opportunities that we face, demographic changes, economic, AI, publishing models change, all these kind of things happening at once. Like what emerges? And during that time, I was an associate dean at Virginia Tech before working at Carnegie Mellon, and I was thinking about this evolutionary metaphor and our leadership teams and the conversations and decisions that we were making about renovations or staffing or collections, and they weren't just functional budget-based decisions, but they were actually evolutionary in the sense of like, you're deciding, are we going to invest in teaching and learning and student engagement and literacies or open science and publishing initiatives and research infrastructure? And you want to do both, but it's kind of like, where do you put that emphasis? Where do you prioritize? And each of these decisions sets you on a course or trajectory. And so do you build digital infrastructure? Do you build physical infrastructure and so forth? And so that's the kind of long about way of just kind of saying that I came to see that perhaps the libraries aren't is it's more of a question that I kind of asked throughout the piece of like, are we heading in the same direction? Are we evolving differently? Are we going to become more specialized as our institutions maybe consider how they differentiate themselves and so forth? And so the teams that we have, the institutions we work for, the communities, the partners that we have, all that forms together into that moment of perhaps specialization and adaptation. So that's that's the long about way of how that article came about.
No, that's incredibly interesting. And as someone who was a previous school librarian in K through 12, like I love the connection that you have made from, this child's book to this grand, like looking at libraries from this really unique perspective. So yes. I was wondering if you've given us some overview of the article, but is there any summary or anything that you want to share that you really feel strongly about that you want people to know about from the article who haven't already read it?
So it's over 10,000 words, so it's it's a big one. It kind of kept, like you said, when you take 10 years to write something, it kind of grows and evolves and so forth over time. So there's a lot there, but again, I think it draws upon, I think I would say there's kind of three parts to this article. The first part really delves into what I talked about before, some of the evolutionary history and that metaphor and applying that and playing with that idea in the library and higher ed context. So again, looking at these external forces like technology innovation and demographic changes and political changes and all the pressures that are out there. How does that affect us? So there's an evolutionary history piece. Then I think there's a second part where I kind of try to make that more tangible, where I kind of have different scenarios or pathways, or what would these what would these different sort of entities, you say, if a library evolves on this path, what might it look like? If one goes in this way, might that look like? And it was less about prediction, but really more to seed the imagination a little bit, and to spark some conversation. And then the third part is really more about the type of leadership and leadership teams maybe during this era. And I thought a lot about that piece when it's really not about maintaining libraries as they were, and it might not even be about growth, which we've had, in the digital era and the emergence of the web and all that. But really, what I kind of explored is like when you're going through this sort of evolutionary change, how are we cultivating a culture of experimentation and the resilience and that sense of purpose? And it's more of that culture leading rather than exactly an innovation leading that I landed on. So yeah, I'd say it's those three things. There's the evolutionary piece, there's the scenarios piece, and then there's the leadership piece.
Well, it's very intriguing. I did read it in its entirety, and it is a great piece. So I hope that readers will dive into it. If there's some takeaway that you would like Portal readers to be left with, after reading it, maybe a little bit more insight into your thought process in this 10-year when you were really coming to bring this into being.
Yeah, I think the core message is that it's a hypothesis. I'm not trying to like document proofs and everything, but I remember it was interesting, and I wrote it last summer, and watching things that happen in the fall where you see libraries that are losing their librarians or losing tenure track, and it's kind of like, what does that path look like in that way? Or even looking at AI and seeing like what libraries that are investing in development of AI versus other ones that are more in the critique or analysis of AI, and are there different paths that you take there? So it's not just about those pieces, but it's really looking at this: what are the social, technological, economic, environmental, political changes? So I'll give you three quick takeaways, for library leaders and practitioners. I think the first one that I really kind of hit at is really developing or adopting a long-term evolutionary mindset. So it's not just waiting for disruption, not just waiting for budget cuts or changes to us, but building this kind of foresight habit where we're scanning for signals of change, where exploring possible plausible futures. We're positioning the library, or trying to position the library to see how is the institution and our surrounding community going to evolve in 5, 10, 20, 100 years. It's also, you get kind of speculative at that point, but it's looking at that sort of that evolutionary mindset. I think the second thing is what I go back to every time. It's like back to understanding the user experience and the ecosystems where our communities exist in. So going beyond just our service stats or usage stats and those kind of things, but really talking regularly and intentionally with students and faculty and our community and our partners, not just about goals and hopes and fears, but pain points and obstacles and changes that they're navigating, whether it's in teaching and learning or research. And again, how are we using those insights to think about our long-term investments that we're making, which ties back into that evolutionary kind of mindset. And I think the last one is just redefining leadership in this era. So thinking about leadership is not just about managing workflows or HR or budgets. And it's not just about chasing the latest innovations or being performatively disruptive. It's really at its core sort of evolutionary leadership that's redemptive. It's more about shaping culture, aligning people around a sense of purpose, a shared purpose, the building the trust, creating conditions where teams can learn and experiment and thrive with this uncertainty that we're kind of facing. So there's a lot in there on that, but the need for leaders who can sort of navigate that complexity with, compassion and taking the long view is what I try to do in this piece.
Well, thank you so much. I was going to say you've given us a lot to think about, and hopefully you've given readers a lot to think about and continuing this conversation, hopefully in social media platforms and with you in person in your new position as you make this transition. I want to thank you again for speaking with us about your article and wish you the best of luck in your new role at Elon. Again, viewers may read the article for free on the Johns Hopkins Press preprint site for Portal. Thank you for watching today and keep an eye out for our next author interview. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you.